Hello, everyone. This is going to be a brief philosophical discussion, and it's about does reality need an objective, metaphysical, or ontological foundationalism, or does reality need objectivity to be reality? Now, this is a very tangibly fascinating question because the notion of reality needs some kind of concretion, like some kind of physicalization or corporalization or, embodiment, not just a mere kind of a phenomenological perceptionality, but an actual kind of action theory, philosophy of action theory kind of way of being that picks the modalities of one's living world. So I think that now some might at first begin this by saying, well, what is reality? And I think reality is simply um, not a language game, as Wittgenstein discussed, but a metaphysics game where I think reality is just the metaphysical indiscernibility, tautologicality, tautologicality and indexicality for which the laws in a possible world continually obey, much like gravity or acceleration or velocity or inertia, or that the pure physicalized Newtonian-esque laws obey, such as the fluctuations of matter and motion and thermodynamics and radiance and etc., etc. So I think that in a sense it's like kind of like the quiddity and hexity of metaphysical laws permeating a possible world, I would say. Or I would say the reality is just it could be phenomenological, it could be emotivist, it could be hylozoistic, it could be perceptivist, but I think that it really is a neurological kind of resistance to eliminativism or a resistance to neurological nihilism. And I think that reality is very much rooted in kind of frames of being and Dasein Sein and Bidenton, Bidun, Bidun, Bidunanton, as Frege wrote about, and sense and reference that kind of boils itself as a rigid designator across um, all possible worlds. And I think that the notion of reality is that reality is kind of like this fluid substrate that forces the objects around it into behaving in certain principalities or certain fixated kind of automata in computational programs of being and kind of action theory, decision theory, game theory, etc. So I think now objectivity is kind of, in a sense, thought to be a manifestation of that, or at least a facet of that, where the allegiance to, either the reality that one sees phenomenologically, the metaphysical laws, the neurological resistance to eliminativism, nihilism, that the phenomenon, perceives versus the mind independence of metaphysical laws possessing reactions and entanglements and disentanglements from the fundamental um, laws of nature and laws of matter and laws of the kind of the critical string theory of the Pythagoreanism of the Fibonacciism of the structuralism of life and the omniverse. So I think now if one lives in a purely solipsistic, now can solipsism be objective? Well, it's a good question, but I think that extreme truth or that extreme right tail of truth in the case of solipsism and that subjectivity is only a relativism in some possible worlds. Though if one could argue it is in all possible worlds. But anyways, I think that reality, whether it's pluralistic or a monad, a dyad, a triad, a quadrad, quintad, etc., is a good question. Does reality have more or less degrees of truth, or is it a binary Boolean quantity and quality? As Aristotle would distinguish between forms of matter and forms of behaviorism for abstract objects, as they kind of network and index themselves. So I think that reality is kind of like a object-oriented programming language that refuses to bend to the will of Heraclitean cradalism or acceleration for time, space, the fluctuation of inner temporicity in one's thoughts, and the hexity of their personhood that defines the objects and their quantity of their thoughts in a kind of an interval rate. So I think that reality without subjectivity isn't impossible, but it's a question of if one only sees the phenomenological as the absolutism, the omnism, then what does it mean for it to be a metaphysical law if it's only purely phenomenological and not absolutely bent to mind independence? So I think that my definition of reality is really a, co- like a Chinese room in the Searlean experiment code for the automata of metaphysical laws that are carried out systematically with like kind of programming mm, CPUs or computational hardware across the omniverse. So I think it's not embedded, but it's kind of a functionalism ideology. So I think, or functionalism eschatology or teleology too. So I think that reality is mind-boggling, but it's also that it can be intersubjective, subjective, and objective. But in this kind of Cartesian coordinate plane, there's the question of if it's many-valued, if it's a monad, a dyad. Now, which perspective even is more objective or more closer to the absolute truth of absolute infinity is relatively epistemological and epistemically unknown. So you can be quite mysterious about it, and often probabilistically, and I would be. But I think that ultimately reality is a manifestation of Whiteheadian in activism of the pluralities of possibilism and actualism kind of quantum entangling and disentangling each other. And I want to thank you for listening, and I hope this gave you some good insights. So take care, my friend. Bye.